Alright, this is Casey here at Quadrocopter. I just thought I'd take a second to show you how to solder up a shutter release from Mikrokopter. So in this case it's the 5D shutter release, so this will actually work with 5D, Mark II, Mark III, and 7D, and I'm not sure what other Canon cameras. But it's pretty easy, so even if you aren't very good at soldering, it's something that most people can kind of manage their way through. So the first goal is to basically figure out which wires you actually want to combine together. So in this case there's 3 wires coming out. So basically what we have is a ground and 2 other wires. In this case I already know the white is the ground. And what's going to happen is basically if you short 2 of these wires together, it's going to focus, so that's basically going to be a half press, and if you short the other 2 together, it's going to be a full press, which would take the photo. So right now an easy way to figure that out is basically to take your camera. So I'm actually just going to plug it into my 5D here. And so what I'm going to do is you can actually just start touching wires together in this case to figure out which one does what. So the nice thing about this is if you decide to come up with a different shutter release for a different camera, it's pretty easy to actually figure out which wires are which. So to start, you just grab 2 of them together, and in this case when I push the white and yellow together, it is, it looks like focusing my camera. And when I press the red and white together, it's actually going to take a photo. So that narrows it down, so that's going to be really useful in the next stage. So the next thing we're going to do is actually take a look at this little board right here. So basically we've got one side to solder our JST onto, and on the other side we've actually got the spot to solder our shutter release itself onto. So I'm just going to position it in this helping hands right here. Makes it a lot easier to solder that on. And I'm actually going to start by soldering the JST side on. And so what you'll do is you'll basically just strip the wires off of this first. And you can actually stick your thumbnail kind of between the 2 wires to split them apart. Makes them a little easier. You're going to twist the copper of both of these wires so that you don't get any of the strands moving around. And then we're going to do what's called tinning these wires. We're basically going to add solder to the wires before we even start to solder it, and that's going to make it a lot easier later on. So we're just going to heat that up, add some solder, and get that on the wires. And that's all we have to do. It's all pretty easy. Now I'm actually going to tin the soldering pads themselves on that PCB board here. So we're just going to add enough so that we get a nice chunk of solder on there. And then we're just going to solder this on. So on the top here, you're going to see a positive, and on the bottom, we're going to see a negative. So if we heat that up, we can go ahead and just dip that in. And that side soldered on. And now it's usually easiest to kind of bend that the other direction. We're going to heat that up and solder that on. And now that side's done. And I can get a little closer here possibly. So that's all we need to do. It's pretty simple. And now we're going to do the other side, and this is the side for the shutter release itself, and that's on the outside for the shutter release. So now what we're going to do is basically what this little PCB board does is it simulates pushing 2 wires together and shorting them out. So it's going to simulate us physically shorting these wires. So all we're going to do is we're going to take the white wire and we're going to solder it to the negative, the out minus right here, and then we're going to actually combine these other 2 wires and solder them onto the plus pad on the top. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to, when you fire your shutter release, when you plug this into your flight control and you flip the switch on your radio that you set up, it's actually going to short all those wires together, which in theory is going to not only focus your camera but then fire the shutter release and take the actual picture. And I'm actually left-handed, so I'm going to flip this around here, make it a little easier on myself. And I'm going to do the same thing as before. So the nice thing is these actually come pre-tinned, which makes it a little easier, but I am going to tin the pads on the PCB board itself. So that's a pretty quick, easy process. Now I actually find it's easier to solder the 2 wires on first. Otherwise you kind of have to mess around pulling wires around. So I'm just going to kind of combine both of those wires up and stick them into that one solder point and let it dry. And now I'm going to twist this wire around and make sure that I can position that white wire on the negative there at the bottom and solder that on. All right, so now you can see it right here. We've basically got the white here on the top and the red and yellow soldered together at the bottom. And then on the other side, we just have our plus and minus. And now if we were to plug this into our flight control and set up the output on the flight control, we would actually be able to just fire our 5D or 7D or whatever the case may be. At this point, all you have to do is slide your shrink wrap over the top. It's nice that you don't have to slide that over beforehand. I do recommend testing to make sure the shutter release works before you shrink wrap this. Otherwise you might have to cut it off and then you got to find some shrink wrap to replace it with. But once you shrink wrap it, you should be all set. That's it for now.